All right, today we're going to break down the arguments in Charlie Kirk's book, The College Scam. It's pretty provocative. We're going to walk through the case that he builds against the American university system, piece by piece, using the evidence he lays out. So let's dive right in.
Right off the bat, you can tell this book is not pulling any punches. This endorsement from Tucker Carlson is right there on the cover, and it immediately frames the whole thing, not just as a critique, but as an expose of what the author believes is a massive deception at the heart of American higher education.
So the entire book is built around this really powerful metaphor, a courtroom trial. The author positions himself as the prosecutor. The entire college system is the one on trial and, well, you, the reader, the viewer, you're put in the jury box.
So, sticking with that trial theme, here's how we're going to walk through the case. We'll start with the indictment, then look at the evidence in the financial case, the educational case, and the ideological case. And finally, we'll get to the verdict.
Okay, let's start things off with part one of this trial, the indictment. This is where the author officially lays out the charges against the American college system.
And here you see the author himself really leaning into that idea. He's speaking directly to you, saying the information in this book isn't a lecture, it's evidence. Evidence for you to weigh. He's basically calling on you to be the judge.
The book actually lays out a full 10-count indictment. We're going to focus on these core charges because they really form the backbone of his whole argument, covering everything from the crazy costs to the very purpose of what an education is supposed to be.
All right, let's dig into the first big pile of evidence, the financial case. The argument here isn't just that college is expensive, but that it's causing real, severe economic harm to students and, their families too.
So the book kicks off its financial case with this really startling number, $33,800. But here's the kicker. According to the author, that's not the average debt for a recent grad. No, that's the average for borrowers in their 60s. The whole point being made here is that this debt has become a lifelong burden, not some short-term investment that you pay off.
And to really drive that point home, to put a human face on it, the book highlights stories like this one. It uses this extreme example of a Columbia film grad with over $250,000 in debt to illustrate a core claim that the system is just broken, with costs that can totally outweigh any career payoff. And this really gets to the heart of the financial argument, right? On one hand, you have this promise we've all heard forever, that college is the golden ticket. But the book claims the reality is the exact opposite. It argues that student debt has become this huge roadblock, actually stopping young people from hitting major life milestones like buying a house. And just to put a price tag on all this, the book points to these numbers from the 2021-2022 school year. The argument is simple. An annual cost of over $38,000 for a private college, or even over $10,000 for an in-state public school, that's just not sustainable for the average family. Okay, next up in the trial, the educational case. This part of the book's argument really starts to challenge the value of the degree itself, asking the question, are universities even teaching students what they need to succeed anymore?
One of the main pieces of evidence the prosecution presents in this educational case is this statistic right here. Citing a study, the book claims that a whopping 41% of recent graduates are underemployed, meaning they're working in jobs that don't even require that expensive degree they just spent 4 years earning.
And again, to back up the data, the book brings in testimonials like this one. By quoting a successful professional, someone who made a 30 under 30 list, who calls her own college experience a colossal waste of time, the author argues that it's actually practical skills and personal drive, not a formal degree, that are the real keys to success.
And then the author presents what might be the most damning piece of evidence in the whole educational case, and it's from a study called Academically Adrift. What did it find? That after 2 full years of college, almost half of students, 45%, showed no measurable improvement in critical thinking, complex reasoning, or writing. This is presented as Exhibit A that colleges are failing at their most basic mission.
All right, now we're moving into the final, and probably the most controversial part of the prosecution's case, the ideological argument. This section claims that universities have stopped being places of open inquiry and have become centers for political indoctrination.
The book's argument here is that many of today's most divisive political movements either started on or were popularized on college campuses. It presents ideas like these as a direct product of the modern university environment. Now, this is really important. To understand the book's argument, we have to use its specific definitions. This is how the source material itself defines critical race theory.
It's presented as a framework that essentially reframes Marxist conflict theory, but swaps class for race and identifies white supremacy as the core oppressive structure in society.
The book then tries to trace what it calls campus intolerance all the way back to the philosopher Herbert Marcuse. It presents this summary of his concept of repressive tolerance to argue that a double standard exists on campus, one where one side of the political spectrum is tolerated and the other is silenced, sometimes forcefully.
So, we've gone through the key evidence from the book's financial, educational, and ideological arguments. And that brings us to the end of the trial, the verdict.
In a nutshell, this is the prosecution's closing argument. It's a summary of all the charges, painting this picture of a higher education system that, according to the author, systemically fails students on every single front, financially, academically, and ideologically.
And just like that, the book rests its case. It turns the final decision over to you. After laying out all this evidence against the college system, it leaves you, the jury, with one very direct question. Is the defendant guilty as charged?